If there's any one topic I see modern day FNaF theorists practically freaking out over, it's the FNaF series of books. More specifically, the most recent run, that being Tales from the Pizzaplex. Let me explain. Recently, in the Five Nights at Freddy series, we had one hell of a stinky game when it came down to the lore, that being Security Breach. Parts of it felt like they were cut down from what they were meant to be, resulting in a disorderly mess that left a large amount of fans unsatisfied. Personally, I think we were set up from the start, as MatPat of all people revealed he was contacted by Steel Wool before the release of the game asking if he had a mole on the inside, only for the game to release and MatPat to find out much of it had been completely changed from what was presumably his accurate prediction. So to fill in the pieces of this brand new puzzle, we turn to the new book series coming out, Tales from the Pizzaplex. This series was different than previous ones, being centered on the new location from this game. However, it's a FNaF book series, so take it with a grain of salt. And that's what people believed, until we got one particular story, GGY. This is the story that caught everyone's attention. It was a story that confirmed Gregory, the character we play as in Security Breach, was Patient 46, the secret manipulator who seemed to be keeping an eye on Vanessa through therapy sessions. This is when the conversation of today's video started, but I'm not done. Then we were introduced through a couple stories to a character known as the Mimic. The Mimic is an endoskeleton who mimics what it sees, and it's believed at some point may have seen William Afton and started mimicking him. This is the character who it's currently believed would become Burntrap. This was a huge shock to the system, as it alerted us to the possibility and likelihood that Burntrap was not in fact a resurrected William, but instead a synthetic copy of him, a copycat killer of sorts, a classic horror trope. For others, including myself, this was awesome news, as it meant that Afton as an influence could go on throughout the series, but the character of Afton would remain dead and trapped in hell. But that's when the conversation that GGY started really picked up, emphasized by theorists like MatPat and FNaF. Are these books canon? And can we use them to help solve the lore of the games? If you want my answer, yes, absolutely. However, if that's true, I totally understand why MatPat and FNaF are hesitant to believe this. Let me explain. Before Tales from the Pizzaplex, there was a FNaF series known as Fazbear Frights. Each book contained 3 short horror stories that were supposed to take place in the world of Five Nights at Freddy's. But the world? Or a world? As we now know, because Scott has said as much, the Silver Eyes trilogy of books, which are long-form novels, existed in their own separate universe to tell its own separate stories. However, when the Frights books were coming out, the wording on the back covers read that they were set in different corners of the FNaF canon. What does that mean? Well, let's look at how Scott has defined canon in the past, that being at one point he called the Silver Eyes books canon, but then also stated that it's a different timeline. In my opinion, what this likely means is that the novel trilogy is how the story could have gone, versus the games where it's another timeline where things happen a little differently. I think this is what Scott means when he says different corners of the canon. Scott has also said that some of the Fright stories connect directly to the games, but we aren't sure what that means either. That could mean some of these are canon to the game's timeline, but in my opinion, this is Scott's way of saying that some characters in the books are characters we've seen in the games. Things like the man in room 1280. The man in that story, the hospital patient that should definitely be dead, well, we later found out that man is William Afton, a pronouncedly game-based character. All of this to say, the way that Fazbear Frights as a book series worked is still relatively unknown. In my opinion, it was just Scott telling us stories he either couldn't tell in the games, or that he wanted to, but wouldn't make sense in the main continuity. Things like Hide and Seek are really cool stories, but how do you fit that story into a FNaF game? And that brings us to the newest series, Tales from the Pizzaplex. There's been a distinction between book timelines and game timeline, so clearly this one should be in a separate continuity as well, right? Well, don't be so hasty. Security Breach is a big game with a lot of areas that simply exist when you play them. You never really have to see the whole thing or find all the secrets in order to win, but there's hidden lore just about everywhere. One of the big things people caught on to were the high scoreboards on the arcade games. Most of them in the Pizzaplex had one name at the top, the letters GGY. Several people theorized at the time that this GGY was Gregory, although we could never prove it. But then, an entire story in Tales from the Pizzaplex was dedicated to this very mystery. and it spelled out exactly what we believed previously, that Gregory is GGY. There were lots of connections being made, acknowledging the generators in the daycare, the theater next door. There was given an in-universe explanation why some attractions aren't seen in Security Breach. It's constantly going through renovations. Practically every detail you see in one of these short stories was either directly connected or could be traced to something in Security Breach. All of this to say, while the other books flirted with the idea of being game canon, this one screamed, "I am canon" to the games. And if it's canon, then suddenly we have explanations for so many previously unexplained segments of Security Breach. We know about how the Pizzaplex became corrupt, we know who's behind all of it. Hell, we even have answers for things like the post-it note room and the wall code in Mike's room. But then, one word was used that threw everything into question. Parallel. And it became my least favorite word as a theorist. Let me explain. I'm not sure who the first theorist was to use it, but I first heard this idea through FNaF, that being that the books weren't canon to the games, but they paralleled them heavily. Stories being told in Tales from the Pizzaplex didn't necessarily happen in Security Breach, but we should be looking for stories that lined up with them. To this I say, why? Why would Scott essentially write the same story twice, only making them slightly different, to a point where they don't tell the exact same story, but almost the exact same story? Hell, GGY appears in both the games and the books. What's parallel about that? That's just the same. But okay, it wouldn't exactly be the first time Scott's done something like this. The Fright story What We Found is often seen as a retelling of FNaF 3, and several events of the novel trilogy could be said to just be retelling events of the game. But in my opinion, neither of those cases are as extreme as this. But let's talk about the most popular theory from the parallel universe department, that being that the book character Edwin is a parallel to the also book character Henry. Okay, that's not the best way to introduce this argument, but I figure I should mention that Henry as a character did not exist in the games until Pizzeria Sim. Before then, Henry was strictly a book character, but now that he's been fully canonized, people just seem to forget that Henry comes from that book series. Regardless of that, the theory states that Edwin is meant to be a parallel to Henry, given that their stories are similar with similar outcomes. Both are engineers and presumably single fathers with young children. In both stories, these children die in car-related incidents, which inspires these fathers to do something incredibly rash. That being, they make robot copies of their children. These robot copies end up being evil, and thus, that's the story. Except, it's not really that simple. I left out a lot and only kept what I think is true between the two of them. Except for one lie. You see, all of that built-in evil robot stuff on Henry's end at least doesn't seem to be canon to the games. It's never mentioned, brought up, none of it seems to be relevant or true to the games. But then, okay, maybe Edwin isn't parallel to Game Henry, maybe he's parallel to Book Henry. Again, that can't be true either, as Henry's daughter in the books is not killed in a car-related incident. She's instead killed in the pizzeria by William Afton. Also on the topic of those evil robots, an important distinction is that although both were made to imitate or mimic a person, Edwin made his robot before his son's death, and it only became evil when Edwin instilled his pain and agony into it. On the flip side, the evil robot Henry made, the adult Charlie or Circus Baby, was only made evil after William Afton stole it and modified it. No such parallel exists in Edwin's story. No outside force that would seemingly turn it evil. You could argue that Afton makes the mimic evil and that's why it copies him, but as we see in the books, it was killing people long before it even had legs. Then there's the deaths of their kids, and this is the big one if you ask me. That being, David was killed when chasing his ball into the road and was then hit by a car. Charlotte was killed after being locked out by the other kids, and William Afton drove by and killed her before making his getaway. Between these two cases, the only thing they have in common is a car being present, and in Charlotte's case, that almost seems coincidental. The car had nothing to do with her death, it was all Afton, versus in David's case, it was the literal object that killed him. The biggest difference between the two, though, is that one was an accident and one was murder. This creates two very different motivations between the two. In Edwin's case, it fills him with guilt and anger. He becomes wrathful and lonely. In Henry's case, he feels the betrayal of a close friend, and literally makes it his life's work after the fact to fix all the damage Afton has done. If Edwin and Henry really are parallels, then why aren't they parallels the whole way through? Keep in mind that after the story called The Storyteller, Edwin is dead. There's nothing else he can do. The short answer? I don't think they are parallel. In my opinion, there's too many crucial differences between the two of them for them to essentially be the same person across different universes. Hold on, actually. Same person across different universes? That's another big thing. When Scott uses a character in one timeline and then in another, like say William Afton, they always have the same name. We knew William Afton was the killer's name before Sister Location because of the books, and then the games confirmed it outright. So if Edwin was really meant to be a Henry parallel, or a version of Henry in a different timeline, then his name should still be Henry. I've now devoted a lot of time to debunking a theory that I'm not sure many people agreed with in the first place, so let's keep going. There's one thing specifically that Scott said regarding the books that I want to bring up, that being this sentence here. Let me at least say this. Future games will look forward, but look to the novels to fill in some blanks of the past. Fill in some blanks of the past. Scott is telling us blatantly here that the books are important to filling in the blanks of the past. This right here, this single sentence tells us everything we need to know. Notice how he doesn't say, use this to read parallels of the past that I wrote or whatever. Here he is pretty much confirming that what you see here is what's important. And what are some of those blanks? Well, how about where did Burntrap come from? What steps led to the game Help Wanted being created? Who is Patient 46? These are the questions that we're being given the answers to, and I think we should start listening. But I know there's going to be some reluctance towards this idea. I mean, the mantra has pretty much always been that if we see it in a book but it's not in the games, then it's not canon to the games. But now we're seeing GGY in the games, we're seeing evidence of past stories, and evidence suggesting different specific areas like the Daycare are one-to-one to what we see in the books. That's really what has me convinced these books are canon to the game timeline. They just line up so damn well. Am I happy that we're being drip-fed lore like this? Honestly, no. I'd rather we see the story unfold in the games themselves, rather than be limited to peripheral books that the vast majority of FNAF fans either haven't read or don't even know exist. However, I'm willing to accept that what we're being told here is the truth. It's not a different universe, it's not a literary parallel. These characters are who the books tell us they are. With all that being said, if you disagree with me, that's totally fine. I don't want to cast shade on any person or group of people, this is just how I think we should interpret the books. Believe me, the books absolutely convoluted the story in a terrible way, but now that we finally have a book series that seems clear and tells us what we need to know, I'm actually surprised more people aren't jumping on these things as the answers. I mean, let's face it, there's more evidence suggesting Glitchtrap is Mimic 1 than Charlotte or Elizabeth. I think it's high time we actually acknowledge it. That being said, don't expect more Mimic or Glitchtrap theories out of me anytime soon. I just kinda don't have anything prepared that I necessarily believe in, or think others will believe in. But until next time, I'm DMuted. Be sure to subscribe, and peace.
This thing on? Hello? Ah, the red light is running. Hello, all you out there, sitting on your computers or on your phones. If you're watching this, that means I've successfully hijacked the signal. My name is lmao. Would you shut up? I'm talking to the internet. Now then, a certain runaway rabbit friend of ours, a very busy bunny. I'm sure by now you've seen some of his work. Stuff like the VHS videos, or those godforsaken theories and game reviews. Never was one for those. Apparently not many of you were either. But anyway, I'm here on his behalf to apologize. He hasn't been making as many videos lately. He's been very busy. Wish I could have gone with him. Take some of that weight off his shoulders before Bobo and I are still stuck in the void. Oh, shut up! I'm serious now! At the very least, he still keeps in contact with us. Tells us about that big blue ball he lives on now. You know, he visited recently. Bad idea for him. Malice was not very happy seeing him again after he left the first time. But then again, Malice isn't ever really happy to see anyone. Anyway, on behalf of the Voidlings here, I suppose I wanted to give a little preview into what our rabbit friend has been doing recently. For starters, he's been watching another VHS series, This one called Fazbear Toddler Fun, or something like that. He's also been doing a lot more streaming. He's told us that he really likes it. God knows it's entertaining to watch him bumble through game after game. But none of that is why I wanted to broadcast this message. I wanted to say this. Muted seems a little embarrassed about us. He likes us, yes, but he doesn't seem to think we were necessarily good additions to his channel. Well, no more. Now you know we're here. Now you know we exist. And now you know Muted was down here with the rest of us at one point. I think he left because of Malice. Hell, who wouldn't? Malice isn't exactly a fun guy to be around, all the crypticism and vague threats. He probably flew the coop just to get away from all of Malice's little torments and threats. Say, if you happen to see Muted again, tell him his good friend Loudmouth says hello. Oh, and definitely be sure to check in on his streams. He told us he streams every Monday and Friday at 1 p.m. EST. He also knows that these days are subject to change at any given moment based on his living situation. Anyway, before I turn this camera thingy off, I want to make something very clear. I'm sticking around. Well, Bobo and I guess Malice maybe, Muted can't just leave us down here. So we'll drop in from time to time now and give our thoughts and our opinions on things. Who knows? Maybe Muted will let me on one of his streams. Until then, Loudmouth here. Peace.